welcome. Thank you very much for coming after lunch. I know we have a hard task because now your digestive system is working against us. We have to make a very interesting panel so that you don't fall asleep because your digestive system costs all the energy. Unfortunately, we have one panelist who could not come. Helen, the only woman on the panel. So imagine myself without a beard and with a skirt. Unfortunately, she was here yesterday. We had the speaker's dinner in the evening. She was here, so I'm not sure what has happened to her. But let's get started with that. We have here a number of gentlemen on my panel. And maybe we start with a little introduction round. My name is Mario Herger. I've been living here in the Silicon Valley for 18 years. I worked for SAP for a long time, 15 years, and for the past 6 years. I'm a technology and trend researcher writing books, and one book was The Last Driver License Holder Has Already Been Born, where I talk about autonomous driving and electric driving and so on. The book, the English version comes out in October. So I'm the moderator. And we have here a number of gentlemen. Anil, Continental, Leland from NXP, Ben from help me, DeepScale. And,
there's so many products and companies that start with deep
and Steve from Rivian. Maybe give us 2 or 3 sentences, what you do, what your company does to start off.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mario. I'm from Continental Automotive. It's a tier 1 supplier, one of the top 3 guys, globally, German company. And in Continental, I am part of this organization called Startup Program, COPACE. I am responsible for North America. I'm based in San Jose here. Mainly looking for innovation from startup ecosystem that I can connect back with the company.
Okay, thank you. My name is Leland Key. I'm with NXP. I'm kind of the old Detroit establishment guy here. So I've been in Detroit 30 years in the automotive industry. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
I'm Ben Landon. I'm the head of product and business development for DeepScale. It is a startup that's based here in Mountain View. We do efficient embedded deep learning for perception solutions. So taking data off of sensors and extracting important insights for those for automated driving.
Hello everyone, my name is Sethu Raman Gopal, and I lead the connected car and digital experience team at Rivian. Rivian is a pretty exciting company. We launched the 2 vehicles towards the end of 2020. It's an all-electric 5-seater pickup truck and a 7-seater SUV.
Okay, my name is Helen Pan. I'm the head of autonomous driving hardware from Baidu ESA. So we're developing the autonomous driving technology full stack from all the way, including everything for the autonomous driving technology.
Wonderful. So we have Helen also on the panel. So a few weeks ago, I happened to be in the area of Mannheim. And if you know, Mannheim was where Carl Benz had his first factory. And I learned a little bit about the history because I've lived in Heidelberg for 3 years. What happened there was in the 1880s, a woman could not manage her own money when she had parents or when she was married. And then there was this young lady, her first name was Bertha, and she was an orphan, a rich heir of her parents' fortune. And then she met this young, dashing engineer who had this shit-crazy idea of putting an engine on a horse carriage. Yeah, I mean, that is a really stupid idea, right? In 1886, right? So she married him. His name was Carl Benz. So she became Bertha Benz, and he used her money, she becoming the first venture capitalist in the automotive industry, so to speak, to basically build proof of concepts. Motorwagen 1 was the first one. And there were a number of potential buyers coming to their factory, to their little workshop, but they were doubtful about that because they didn't see the car running on public streets because the city of Mannheim didn't give them a permit to test the car on public roads. Does it sound familiar, right? Okay. So one day when she was too frustrated, she decided, without telling her husband, without telling the city of Mannheim, to just take the car, take her 2 sons who were 13 and 14 years old, and drive to her mother to Pforzheim, which is around 70 miles, 112 kilometers from there, through the countryside. And because Bertha Benz, if we were to describe her in today's terms, she was this nerdy girl, geek girl, this engineering girl. She would have probably in our times been an engineer, fixed a number of problems on the road. She used her hairpin to clean the hose for the fuel. She used her garter to isolate the spark plugs. She gave feedback to her husband about the brake pedals, that they're not good enough, that we probably need gears when we go up the hills, because her sons, 13 and 14 minors, had to push it up. And she had to get some gasoline. So where did you get gasoline in 1886? Yeah, without gas stations. Yeah. So luckily there was a pharmacy in Wieslach, a few kilometers from there, where she bought 2 liters of gasoline. This is everything that they had, half a gallon, because that was used for cleaning stuff. Today, this pharmacy is still in existence and has a big sign there that says, first gas station in the world. Right? You can still go and visit that. And then finally she arrived. So we have to tell it, this criminal woman, the first venture capitalist, ass-kicked basically the automotive industry today. And somehow in 10 years later, Mercedes-Benz sold 600 cars per year. So when we look now at the transportation industry back then, none of the horse carriage makers made it into the automotive industry. Maybe Studebaker is one until the 1960s who made cars, but almost nobody. So somehow, those automotive pioneers back then cracked the code of the transportation industry and basically put them out of business. That leads us to the first question that we have, because it's also the title, can Silicon Valley crack the auto industry code? What actually is the auto industry code that we're trying to crack from your perspective? You may start, Anil.
The future of the vehicle, right? In past it was a lot about the hardware, the mechatronics, and now it's the autonomous, going from L2 and above, all the way to L4, L5. And it's a lot about, hey, I can sense the environment using my sensors, which the traditional automotive world, in combination with the help from the semiconductor, they can really understand well. But now I generate a lot of this data, and I need to make sense using the data. And, who in the world knows how to handle data better than Valley? And that's where I think the Valley comes in, breaking that auto industry code of, trying to do everything in-house versus trying to do outside the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. For me, that's what is the breaking the code.
Yeah, I think automotive, in my history, it used to be all about horsepower and cup holders. And now that's obviously changing quite a bit. And I think it's, in my view, is really a transformative era that we're entering. And when you look at autonomous, connectivity, electrification, mobility as a service, I think that's where the auto industry, when you talk about cracking the code, the code that they're cracking is actually changing in terms of what the expectations are from the consumers. So.
Those covered it pretty well. Yeah, we have a transition from hardware to software. The automotive industry has not historically been all that strong, not in just developing their own software, because it's only recently that lines of code have gone into vehicles. They've certainly not wanted to source that software from the outside. But I think it was the early Teslas had more lines of code in them than F-16s. It's like I think north of 100 million lines of code now for cars that you can go out and buy today. And that's clearly a task that's not within the core competency or even the feasibility for every company to go and own their own code base that does that from end to end. So I think on top of this transition from focus on mechatronics to these to software-based and data-based solutions, to these waves that we had from horsepower sells cars, to no infotainment sells cars, to no autonomy will sell cars, through all of that, you have to actually marry this all together with some outside capabilities that have just never been germane to the automotive industry.
Yeah, I think everybody has sort of covered, but the biggest emphasis that I would say is essentially the model that exists today in the automotive industry. The model is essentially it's a complex system to be put together, which means you need hundreds and thousands of different components to be coming together. And obviously, everybody has seen the pain points with different OEMs when it comes to the actual manufacturing, where it took over 100 years or maybe 80 years for the manufacturing system to be where it is in terms of just-in-time delivery and all that. But what that also means is there is, in many ways, an over-reliance on the tier ones, the tier twos. Those terminologies have come up simply because of the nature of how that beast is. And the over-reliance, similar to what Ben said, on the tier ones and the tier twos, in order for something to be done as part of your solution, means that sometimes you make and give stepchild treatments to some of the more important aspects of your system, which you don't even realize. Infotainment is a very, very typical example of something which is farmed out because you don't want to know what's happening there, and you just hand out a certain set of specifications. No offense to my friend Anil from Continental, but all the tier ones, the OEMs find it much easier to put out the requirements which are stale by the time the product is actually out, because it takes a while. It's 3 years, 2 years before the product actually comes out. Now, to break that, so that essentially is you need to crack that sort of behavior, that sort of practice, which is more habitual, and to overcome that fear and to say, why don't we do that in-house? And I think Rivian in many ways has taken that approach, and it was very refreshing. Maybe it was because RJ came out of school and he didn't have any corporate experience, didn't have any of the baggage of how this was done earlier. And he just said, oh, this just seems to be the logical way of doing it. And to me, when I came to Rivian, that was very refreshing, because coming from a consumer electronics background, where everything is much faster, more agile, and you want to always catch the very edge of the modern progressiveness. And for that to be brought in very early means you have to bring a lot of that in-house. Software is absolutely the key. To throw some more numbers here, Google and all of its internet services accounts to some 2 billion lines of code. So there's a wonderful graphic on all these lines of code and where they line up. So you've got the human genome, which is 3,300 billion lines of code, if at all there was lines of code for the human genome. And then you have Google, and then you have a mouse. That's the complexity. And then you have car software, which means we are fourth in line comparing ourselves to organisms, and the car is being compared to a complicated and sophisticated system like a human being. So I think the key is essentially to understand that it's not just the sheer number of lines or sheer volume of software, but essentially how much of it do you really want to bring in-house and add your sauce on top of it, not be afraid to take that leap.
Great. I think the panelists gave a really good explanation about what they think. Maybe I'll give a simple way to look at it. So to answer the question, can Silicon Valley really crack the auto industry code? Actually, I'm working on the autonomous driving for the past 4 to 5 years. So my thinking is actually collaborations. We should collaborate with each other, and in this new autonomous driving come in, actually it is a new high-tech AI technology entering with new sources to the autonomous drive, to the automobile industry. I was in Michigan in April, attending a conference and talking to a lot of the people who is from auto industry, and what they're saying, they suddenly feel the automobile world is sexy again. And so I think there's a 3 key players to make this technology, become alive again. They need the AI technology, the high-tech company who is specialized in their AI technology in software, hardware, in terms, adding this new capability into it. Another one is the traditional automobile car makers, and they are still validated, very tier ones, OEMs, and then you also need help from the government. The government have to make this regulation to make sure this is friendly to make this entering this industry. What the industry we're entering is for transportation. It matters for people, humans, day to life. We want to be a very responsible engineer and very responsible for the product we developed. So we make sure this one, sometimes they can cause the death and the life. So it's very critical. And starting with the mission for the autonomous driving, the early stage of in a research phase, they actually want to bring this new capability to a younger, elder, and disability peoples, and the people can get the mobility to touch from point A to point B freely. And they want to make sure they have less car accidents in the worldwide to save the mankind. But two people developing this technology, and then we realize there's how hard it is, and there are so many things you have to be overcome. So I think the best way is collaborating with each other so we can be able to work all together. And Baidu is the only one actually has announced this open platform Apollo. So they would like to, promoting the collaborations and then to jointly to make the innovation happen sooner and quicker.
Okay. So when I look at the news in the past month, what I read is that multiple OEMs were complaining how difficult it is to get talents, these talents that they require, like AI experts, computer scientists, data analysts, roboticists into their organizations. It may be even for those people, for those talents, career damaging actually to work for such an OEM, because if you wait 4 months for internal IT to approve to install Apollo, for example, on your IT-issued laptop, you have a problem, while your peers in startups, Rivian and other companies, are already having their code on the car. Now, I know that Baidu has this open source platform and doing that. Is this the way, when I look at that, maybe the question should be different. How can the auto industry crack the Silicon Valley code? Is this the chance that they have? Will they survive that? Should they pursue their own brand, their own thing, or collaborate? What does it mean for the brand? Can you start, Helen, with that?
Okay, I think I moved down to the Silicon Valley in 2011. Before that, I lived more than 10 years up in Oregon, the West Coast. So a couple of things I think Silicon Valley is very unique in here. Number one, we have good weathers. It's the best weather in the world. And second, we have people. The people here is diversified talent pools from all different fields of expertise. And then third, we have technology. And it was pretty amazing, from the PC world to the mobile world, and now we look like it's like an auto world again. And new technologies, and Silicon Valley is always pioneer from that. And in terms of the autonomous driving, for Apollos, we in the CES early in January in Las Vegas, actually we make announcement of Apollo Enterprise. As you mentioned, when you're trying to have deep collaboration with the OEMs and tier ones of joint development, actually you need to tailor the development for their need. So Apollo has the open platform with open to all the developers and partners. We also have the specialized version to collaborate with the OEM and tier ones, or some of the larger corporation, even government can be. And then we're working on this enterprise code, so tailored for their particular need. And for getting this GitHub of the open platform, so people can use this one to validating if your people developing something is on the right path. And also we can make sure you're not starting from, for example, you're building a house. You don't need to make a brick, but you can still build your house. So we're providing those kind of fundamental brick of those foundations for everybody to starting from a higher level, then they can build together. And also, since we have this open platforms, it's easy to communicate, because a lot of times when you have certain hardware, you want to see how good is my hardware characteristic can really improve the performance or can really bring some unique feature to the autonomous driving. Now you have some code to validating to see if you see any of the overall system. If I tell you DBs, SNRs, not everybody engineer understand what you're talking about, but everybody understand, okay, I have no disengagement, I can point A and point B and in certain time and with smooth transitions. Those languages, common language. So those type of things, what the Apollo platform can bring to other people, to have the overall system testing to bring its capability. Yeah.
Okay. Setu?
Yeah.
Did you want to say something? Setu.
No, I think definitely I leave the housing prices and compensation aside as to what it is for Silicon Valley. But there is definitely a sense of sort of belonging and camaraderie when it comes to Silicon Valley for sure, right? It's like you need the proper host, the proper setting for you to get the stuff done. You want to be able to go to the gym to get your workout done. No matter how many dumbbells and barbells you buy and keep it at home, it's possibly not the greatest motivation. The gym is the place that you want to be at. I think that's how Silicon Valley is too. In many ways, at least for Rivian, it was strategic in order to find a home here in Silicon Valley, in order to develop the two biggest sort of technological pieces we wanted to do, which was the connected car digital experience and the autonomy. And to our point, it's a broader expansion of this collaboration where there are certain things which cannot be achieved by just 10, 20, 30, 40, or 100 people. It just requires sort of this community setting. Linux is a great example of all of that came together to allow a platform that is being used in millions and millions of devices today. OpenStreetMap, there's a lot of crowdsourcing that happens with Google Maps and so on. So there is definitely power in the numbers, and there is definitely power in that sense of belonging. And no matter how we dice the talent availability or non-availability, I think it's just that mindset of the people here that allows, I mean, that's why people are here despite the traffic and the weather is good, but there are so many other sort of negative things which you sort of make peace with simply because you want to be in that kind of a setting, because you want to be in the home of the Apples, the Googles, the Facebooks. That then definitely drives sort of the transformation in not just these domains, but everywhere else where there is a need for transformation.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to what have inherently become different mindsets and philosophies on how technology should be built and technology should be adopted. And you have to realize too, the auto industry, while it is a global industry, is not a global entity, right? There are Detroit-based, there's the US Big Three, there's the European Big Three, there's Japan Big Three. Every one of those regions thinks completely differently about what the value proposition of a vehicle is, how technology should be built, and how technology should be adopted. So you actually have what is essentially an exponential or a quadratically growing number of connections and nodes between adopters of this outsider of Silicon Valley that has to try to globally please all of these different automotive entities, right? And to sum it up to what is a fundamental difference, though, is Silicon Valley likes to think really big and figure out the details later. The automotive industry likes to key in on all the details, figure out every little penny, every component of the BOM, and then put those pieces together to see how it makes the whole. And those are fundamentally clashing approaches to building technology. And so the reality is that there's probably some happy medium where you meet in the middle, and that allows you to build technology fast without breaking things, probably, to kind of put a twist on the Silicon Valley move fast and break things term, but also not have 3, 4, 5-year development cycles where by the time a car is on the road, even something as simple as my new iPhone doesn't charge properly in my car because the charging protocol changed by the time the OEM spec'd this charger and by the time the car came on the road, right? So there's a happy medium that fixes those problems.
Yeah, and I think, in Detroit and all the major car complexes around the world, I mean, it's really a religion, right? So you go to Detroit and that's all people think about and they feel they have ownership of it. At the same time, I think in this past 4 or 5 years, there's been a real realization that they know that they can't do everything, especially when it comes to the technology. And we can't compete with the weather for sure. But
maybe this week.
But I think you've also got 100 years of experience in how to build vehicles. You've got tremendous amount of knowledge on things like functional safety, security, reliability, zero defects. I mean, the consumer industry compared to the auto industry, and I've been in both. I mean, I remember in the computer industry, we used to talk about 10,000 ppm, and that was fine because 3 months later you can get a new device. Auto industry, you're buying these things for 15 years, right? So there's a certain knowledge base that's based upon history that the car companies bring to bear. They've also come to the realization that they can't do it alone, and that's why you see the Ford and the Argos, the GMs and the Cruises, and all the partnerships that are going on. So I think Ellen and Sethu, you mentioned collaboration, and to me that's really the key to this whole thing is everyone's got their relative strengths. Silicon Valley can't replicate and Tesla can't replicate 100 years of experience in building vehicles and how to service them, right? I mean, what happens when you get, I mean, it's easy to build 5,000, 50,000 cars a year. Start building millions of cars a year with all the variations that your consumers want. How you service those, because that's a big part of the equation, right? These guys own these cars for 15 years. It breaks down. They don't want to wait a week for someone to come by And especially with electric vehicles, you know, Joe's garage shop is not going to be able to fix that. You need to have an established dealer base that's out there that really knows how to get these vehicles, the second most expensive thing someone buys, back on the road and not sitting in the garage for a number of years. So to me, it comes down to the, you know, everyone's got their relative strengths. Don't discount what Detroit has, and certainly don't discount what Silicon Valley has, but I think together that's the key.
You know, a lot of great things was said, right? You know, the way for me, right, currently Silicon Valley has not yet broken the code. They're trying to break the code. And, you know, the fundamental thing here, right, currently we're in the R&D phase. We are trying to research and develop this whole autonomous stack. And the main thing about in research and development, right, I think there's a lot of risk. And if you are able to, succeed, there's a huge reward. And that's where, you know, the ecosystem here supports that kind of mentality. And they call it like startup ecosystem or entrepreneurial thinking, right? You know, that's where the venture ecosystem kicks in, and, you know, showing this big carrot to all these, you know, guys saying, hey guys, you know, if you solve this problem, there's a huge multi-billion-dollar, you know, price tag awaiting for you. I think that motivates, you know, that big carrot motivates a lot of people. And if you think about, you know, what even Google, right? You know, hey, that makes sense for startups. What about big companies? But, you know, that's where even the Google kind of companies, right, they operate differently, you know, compared to the rest of the corporations. You know, Google it's still a very college, very university, very, you know, entrepreneurial kind of mindset they have for their employees. They propel that. I think that drives a lot of innovation. That's one. And, you know, on the collaboration, right, one element I would like to stress, you know, my background, I've been a chip designer for the first 10 years, and the last 10 years I've been in the corporate side, on the business side, you know. Valley is one location where, right, you know, you can find the top-notch conferences for any topic that happens in Valley. This is one place where all the greatest minds in the world, they get together on a regular basis. I think that access to having, you know, and the vehicle, right, it's no longer just mechatronics and software. It's a combination of multi-system, and all the experts are coming here, and that's what makes Valley so special. And quickly having access to those people, like, you know, within an hour I can go and meet someone, or within, you know, a quick, you know, same time zones, having those, you know, meeting conversations in a very friendly environment, you know, which do not happen, right? And if you're in Detroit or Germany, right? And before you can talk to someone, you're talking about, hey, NDA, are you available? Are you, you know, even by the time you can find the two people are available, it takes away like, you know, weeks together. I think those barriers do not happen here. You know, people are meeting in a lot of, you know, networking meetings, you know, a lot of such kind of meetups, conferences, and having new ideas emerge, you know, in coffee shops. And I think that kind of ecosystem is not as prevalent as in Valley. I think that's what makes Valley so special.
A few months ago, I visited a little startup in France that builds autonomous shuttles. There's no driver's seat in there. There's no steering wheel. And after spending a few hours with them, the guy mentioned one fact. And he said, you know, out of our 220 employees, only 20% have a driver's license. If you go to, let's say, BMW, yeah, you go there because you love driving. Yeah? They even call it the joy of driving that they have here. So I'm wondering, are we actually talking about the same code? Are they this new automotive industry, this new automotive revolution that we see? Isn't that actually creating a new code? So are we not just we're not just not cracking the code, we're just creating our new rules. Like the automotive industry back 130 years ago did not crack the horse code. They cracked the way of how engines work. So given that fact, if this is something that, you know, you think it may be so or maybe not, does the automotive industry actually have a role in that? And how would they get over to that code? Hell, maybe. Yeah, let's get to who has already some ideas?
I'll start, right? Yeah. So what you're here going towards, right, is actually, hey, what is the mode of transportation? You know, is transportation in past, right? And when they thought about, you know, from moving place A to place B, it was the horse, and then they thought about, hey, can the engine take me from place A to place B? I think, you know, that Valley, right? And I think Valley is unique because, you know, people have, you know, the early adopters. There's a lot of people who love technology, who want to try new things. I think that brings, you know, because of the density of population, or, you know, who are working a lot of next generation technologies, they want to be the first guys trying things. You know, take the case of Tesla, right? You know, which place in the US or in the world has the maximum number of vehicles? That's Valley. In US alone, right? It's not just because that's the best car. It's because they want to be on the latest technology. They want to adopt the best technologies, most efficient. They are, apart from the fact that people think sustainability and other things. I think that's what makes Valley different, in terms of, hey, can I think of new ways of transportation? Can it reduce? It's a combination of compromise between, a comfort and, luxury, and people are willing to go more towards comfort. I think that, those early adopters probably you'll find less in other places.
Okay, maybe I'll say a little bit of things. Yeah. So actually, there's a very interesting statistical study about it. I think McKinsey published a report on this. Is to study between the 3 different continents, the US and the Europe and China, Asia. And they learned people's willingness to try new technology. I was actually born and grown up in Beijing, China, and then moved overseas, study in the graduate school, went to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I've been living in US for more than 23 years. And so what I see is very interesting. In the past 40 years, China goes through quite a lot of changes. So the people there are used to changes. Doesn't matter you're older or younger people, they're really used to changes. So they did a study, and China alone, they have a 60% willing to try new technologies because day-to-day their life is changing. So they're just very used to it. And whenever anything come on as new, they like to try. And the second is US. Actually, US have a 30% to 40% range. They are more willing to try new technologies. And the most conservative people is Europe. And they are less less open to the new technology. So I think the change not necessarily always to be good, but a lot of times when every people pull their perspective and to make the change and together will make things better. So the world is changing around us all the times. So we have to adapt it, and we have to embracing it, and also welcome it. Yeah.
I was going to add, I think that there's a tremendous amount of societal changes today, right? I mean, kids today, you hear it anecdotally, they don't want their license. I mean, they don't need to drive to their friend's house. They can just get them up on their Xbox Halo and communicate that way. And I think it's also a on-demand type of society, right? Everyone wants everything. So for me, I look at the car industry and I say, yeah, maybe we're coming to some natural plateaus in regions, especially developed regions like the US, where there's already 800 vehicles per 1,000. So there's already a pretty significant penetration. Could that go up a little bit? Yeah, but marginally. But I think to me, the bigger issue is about mobility. And the need for mobility continues and from the shipment of goods that you want, you order it, you want it 3 hours later. I mean, that has to be transported, whether it's a drone or autonomous vehicle or something. So there's a lot of things that are really driving the demand for mobility. And I think you look at the car companies today, they recognize that, right? They recognize that, okay, this is kind of a fixed level of vehicles perhaps, but there's mobility solutions. So I think Ford announced some time ago that they don't see themselves as a car company, they see themselves as a mobility solutions. And that automatically brings them into looking at car sharing things, autonomous vehicles. I think Ford actually invested in a scooter company. So I think really when you look at Detroit and the car companies, they're really trying to broaden their definition beyond autos into mobility.
So there are 2 sides to the coin here. One is obviously what is the expectation of the consumers and what do they really need? And the other one is what is it that the OEMs and the product makers, what do they want to do? If Leonardo da Vinci was alive today, he would want to OTA upgrade the Mona Lisa, right? Because that's the point. I mean, the creators are never satisfied with their creation. They're constantly looking to sort of upgrade, to add new features, to do something better. That's true whether you're sculpting something or that's true whether you've done a deliverable as a document. It doesn't matter. I think the product requires constant refining. What that means is, it's a similar story to what the iPhone was. When Steve Jobs came out with the iPhone, nobody wanted an iPhone, but everybody embraced it. Everybody just were very happy with the feature sets. Consumers never could have imagined what they wanted next. And I think in many ways, I mean, it goes both ways, but on many accounts, it's equal responsibility on the product developers to be absolutely putting their thinking caps on and then saying, what is it that we can really do in order to satisfy the needs, whether they exist or not. And in many ways, Rivian has tried to do that, where we're going after this adventure white space, where today there does not exist a vehicle which can do a combination of efficiency, utility, as well as the performance. And saying, take the same vehicle to your everyday commute, but at the same time, come weekends, you can take it on an off-road adventure, go skiing, go hiking, go mountain climbing. And I think the bar to get access to that adventure is actually pretty low. In everybody's mind, at least in my mind, the bar was pretty high. If I did want to go on an adventure, I didn't know where to start. Do I go off-roading? Where are the hike locations? Can I take my car? Do I need a 4x4? I think there's a pretty high bar in everybody's mind, but that bar is actually lower. And I think in many ways, Rivian is trying to put out these adventure vehicles, and not just the vehicle themselves, but also the accompanying digital ecosystem that will allow them to say, the bar is actually much lower, and then you can go out and explore and have that adventure.
Ben, maybe last comment.
I mean, I think what most of this boils down to is that there's buyer preference and there are organizational incentives that are primarily driven by profit in the private sector. And those are not always going to be one-to-one. And buyers' preference is never, doesn't matter for what, doesn't matter for how simple of an offering, never going to converge on a single solution that everybody is happy with, right? It could be something as simple as, you know, what food to eat, whether you like CDs or MP3s or vinyl, right? Like, look at people will argue vehemently about which of those they want to adopt, right? And that's going to be true with autonomous driving too. So what it comes down to is there will always be a market for non-autonomous vehicles as long as we are willing to offer that market. But if there's always a market for it, then why wouldn't you always offer that market, right? So I think we can't oversimplify it to the level of we give everybody this solution, and the Chinese adoption rate is faster for new technology, the European is slower. In the end, that doesn't matter that much, because in every country you'll find a market for the product that you build as long as that product is, you know, spec'd in a useful way. And so we have to look at where can we extract value, where can we bring value so that we meet fundamental human wants and needs of get from point A to point B cheaper, do it safer, give me back the real estate that is my garage or that I don't have to pay for parking in San Francisco, right? So there's, I mean, a countless number of new investments and new companies going into thinking about these problems. But realistically, when it's such a convoluted, complex problem where near 8 billion people ultimately need to be served, it's not going to work itself out and not going to converge onto a single type of solution anytime soon.
And understandably, there's still people buying horses today, right? They're just not using them on the highways, so that's a good thing. So let's open the floor for questions to the audience. We have here Monica with a microphone, yeah? Gentleman over here. Yeah.
I have a quick comment about the question. Going back to Silicon Valley, those who've been here long enough or know the history of Silicon Valley, we used to grow apples, peaches, apricots. Then came Hewlett-Packard, IBM, all the great hardware guys. Then became defense industry, Lockheed Martin, aerospace, Westinghouse, L'Oreal. Then went to hardware guys, SGS, Sun, most of them became irrelevant or disappeared, except for Apple. Then became software, web guys, Google, Facebook, all the search guys. Now going to auto industry. This is a great challenge for us because we can't, bad Detroit, you guys invest $100 million over the past 100 years, you're huge capex. We have a crazy guy called Elon Musk, he's an erratic genius, Musk, okay? Those, the history here, it used to be a GM Numi plant years ago. Then Ford had a big plant in Milpitas, Great Mall. So are you going to crack the code? Yes, we can. If you don't become too arrogant, cocky, and complacent.
Okay, that's a comment. Other question? What? Oh, here, there's a gentleman over here. I think was first.
The question here is product interoperability, meaning that today, if I take my smartphone to China, there's no guarantee it will work there, so I have to buy a new phone over there. Same thing, once I bought it over there, there's no guarantee that it will work here. So will the auto industry, the modern auto industry, resolve that issue? That basically I'll get a compatible product. It doesn't matter which continent I want to use it.
Maybe a question for, maybe I'll ask you right. Would you see yourself buying a vehicle, using it here, and shipping it to China or anywhere else? Then you're a very unique user, yeah.
You're a unique user then, yeah.
And I think that as long as governments are involved in setting the requirements, you're going to have some regional differences.
Yeah, well, I mean, more so than that, it goes back to kind of the preferences that I was saying, and not just preferences, but needs too, right? Different geographies have different needs, and it's not just how do I, the user, use my product in various different geographies. I mean, we're coming from the side of the producers of these products, and Ford has over 5,000 SKUs of radio, right? Because every region has different stations, and there's FM1, FM2, AM, XM, right? All of these things, and boxes that need to fit into tiny little cars that can fit on the one-way streets of Europe, and boxes that fit into Ford F-150s, right? So it's really more, it's less of a question to the user, because the user doesn't have a problem. They buy the car that is right for them, and if there are mobility services at the time, you'll call the car that will come pick you up, and hopefully you'll even have the option of, I want to call the car that has a bed in it because I want to go sleep on the ride, or I want to call the car that has an office in it. But for us, as the provider, and people who are in the audience too, the providers of these solutions, this is an immensely complex problem, especially when you talk about how data-driven this field is right now, and that people are saying Tesla has this huge data advantage, and look at Waymo, they're collecting all this data in Arizona, and they have way more than everybody. Do you think their data driving around the streets of Chandler is going to let them roll out autonomous driving service in Shanghai? I don't think it's going to help that much. There will be some learnings, but by no means is it a repeatable process where you have one product that sells into every market. So it's an immensely complex.
I will say that NXP has software-defined radio solutions, so we've got that one taken care of.
There you go.
I was waiting for that.
So the radio SKUs thing is solved.
And by the way, Continental makes, with NXP, we make that happen. Yeah.
Okay. Question over here.
So I think what was interesting, Ben brought up the fact that the markets, Europe, America, Japan, have different auto industry markets. But one thing you didn't say, you didn't mention China. And China is probably, I love what Helen brought up, that, hey, look, we're developing stuff, the world is changing. I think a lot of you guys tend to be a little bit, stovepiped, in the sense that you look at North America or you look at the Bay Area, and you kind of think that's the world. But we have to look at the world differently today, because the fastest growing markets are not North America. They're clearly not Europe. It's China. And I think Helen brought up a very interesting observation in a kind way, without making it sound like America's dying. Which it is, because we're not really developing the new technologies fast enough. And that is, when you have a society that's growing rapidly, change can happen rapidly. Mm-hmm. That happened in the American auto industry in America after the Second World War. We were the ones that drove it, because we were the fastest growing economy that survived.
Yeah.
Now we're not.
Yeah.
So maybe the real question is not, can Silicon Valley crack the auto industry code, but can China crack the Silicon Valley and auto industry code? Yeah.
That's
and I
valid.
think they're doing that.
Yeah,
I think they're doing that. So I'd love to get your impression of what you think China's doing relative to Silicon Valley and the auto industry.
Maybe just real quick, I fully agree with your observations there. You look at the biggest market for electric vehicles is in China, and I would venture to say that the largest full-scale rollout of ADAS, or autonomous vehicles, is going to be in China, right? They've already designated cities that are going to be set up for this thing. So, certainly having a government that can mandate these things really helps, but I agree with you, and I think Helen had a great observation there about the openness they are to change, but absolutely, it's the biggest market today. We all know that, and they're definitely driving it very, very hard. They want to be leaders in electrification. They want to be leaders in autonomous vehicles. So Yeah, very good point.
Maybe from an American point of view, right? I think I agree. I think definitely China grew a lot in the last decade. UBS study recently highlighted that they grew by 15%. That drove most of the automotive. But for the next 10 years, it's expected to grow at the same pace as the rest of the world. 1.2%, something like that. That said, definitely I think there's a lot of EV activity, in a lot of in the autonomous space, a lot of activity happening, and good point. Who will break the code first? Would that be China or Valley? I think at least from when I look at a lot of the startup ecosystem, we also look at China ecosystem too. For me, yes, there's a lot of activity happening in China, but compared to Valley, I think this is still less, specifically on the autonomous side.
So Helen, what do you think is the code, the secret that China has?
Yeah, actually, I want to bring the first question is about globalizations, and this gentleman was asked a really good question about the changing in China. I want to comment his comments. Actually, was very right. There's a study about from 2007 to 2017. Those past 10 years, there are 90% global automotive growth is coming from China. And the CAGR is 16%. The rest of the world is 1%. So that's actually in that sense. But in other sense, because China is less developed in the past, so they have more of the families doesn't never own a car. Now they become owning a car. But in America, it's a very mature market. We own a car, and we maybe change a car because either I like a new car or I want new features, or my car is too old. I have to buy a new one. It happened to me. I just changed to a new car 2 years ago. My previous car, I ran it more than 13 years. I love my car, and as long as it can run, I like it. I have no complaint about it. So there's a uniqueness about autonomous driving. So if you travel globally, you notice the people have driving behaviors very differently. I went to Israel. Israel and the Chinese have one thing is in common. They are very aggressive in driving. And but if you want, in U.S., people very polite. When a pedestrian nearby, they all of a sudden realize that they will suddenly stop and make sure they can bypass, and they can drive again. So it's very different behavior because of uniqueness in different continent. And Europe has its own, And I heard Europe, the road is now very straight and forward, has many variety different signs and particular German. So you have to have Germany, so you have to try it. And because of uniqueness, means autonomous driving have to learn the local behavior of people, so you can fit into the local people driving behaviors, and also be adapt to the local regulations. If you just look at it, even just from China relatively, because the country starting to development in the past 40 years, so they realize the standardization of the traffic signs, and they kind of unified, but not too exactly, but at least the major city, the traffic signs is unified. If you travel in U.S., you notice different Michigan and UI and Silicon Valley, the traffic sign looks different. Mm-hmm. That means if you develop autonomous driving, you need to localize it. That's, bad thing about you need to make many, many different skills. But the good things, they bring a lot of job opportunities. So we have many, many engineers to work on it. Yeah, so you need a local adaptation. So this is very, very true for autonomous driving.
Maybe one point about China too. When you look at the number of people with the STEM degrees in the government, you come up to 90% of those people come from those fields. When you look at U.S. lawmakers and government and European governments, you have much lower numbers. Yeah? Germany, for example, has only one government member that has a STEM degree. That's the chancellor herself, and that basically. For China, it looks a little bit like automotive industry. AI is kind of an engineering problem that they're adopting and attacking and going high speed in there. The Silicon Valley, I think, is also very much engineering driven. That's why the speed may be higher in technology adoption, but that could be one of those things. Let's go to the last question then. Yep.
Yeah. Don't you just to answer the question there? Don't you think Tesla has kind of like cracked the auto industry code? Because I actually met a Detroit guy, he works for GM, and he told me that everything Tesla does, they basically follow and reverse engineer at their lab. Okay.
Right.
So so it should be maybe can auto industry crack Tesla? That thing.
Yeah. So what do you think?
I mean, I think Tesla has definitely brought some good innovation, like OTA, things like that are being widely adopted. But maybe it's just because I'm old in Detroit that I wait and see until you produce 3 million vehicles a year and able to service those on an ongoing basis. But clearly, they brought the whole spirit of innovation. They really jump-started and kicked the guys into gear.
Yeah, I mean, for the record, it's not new that OEMs buy other OEMs' cars and tear them down. That's been going on for decades. So Tesla is a viable teardown as well. They want to figure out what's going on in there. But more importantly, the reason I don't think they've cracked the code as of yet, like Leland said, they've done some great things for the industry. They've accelerated development cycles. They've made other companies realize that they need to move faster or else they will be left behind. It goes without saying how much they've legitimized the electric vehicle movement, which is important on so many levels. But they haven't, where they have not succeeded, is that with all of these great technological things they've done, they've yet to reinvent a business model. They are an OEM that sells cars to people, and as far as we can see, they do it at a loss.
To a distributor.
Okay.
They don't sell it to an individual. That's what Tesla's doing. They sell it through distribution.
I was
talking about.
Distribution is not owned by the car company.
No, fair enough. That's not what I said. Tesla is selling to people, right? And let's abstract away the distribution method. Cars are being sold to consumers. Tesla sells to consumers. GM, Hyundai, they all sell to consumers. Okay? Maybe it happens through dealers. Maybe it doesn't. The bottom line is that's not a new business model. That's a unit economics-driven business model. If you were to crack it, it would mean Tesla's got 30% gross margin and the other OEMs have sub 10. If you were to crack it, it's we make revenue in other ways. We make profits in other ways that are not through selling vehicles. Neither of those two are true yet. So if they're cracking it, it's still in the process of being cracked.
So thank you. I think we're a little bit biased here because there may be a lot of Tesla owners here, right? I want to thank Helen, Sethu, Ben, Leland, and Anil. Also the tech guys for helping us with the audio, Monica for organizing it, and you for your patience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.